KnockBack, the retro and nostalgia podcast, is brought to you by, well, you. If you want to learn how to support our show, go to patreon.com/laststandmedia. Greetings and salutations. Welcome back to KnockBack. My name is Colin Moriarty. I'm joined as always by my brother, Dagan Reagan Moriarty. Dagan, thank you for joining me today, my friend. How are you? How are you, Reagan McNeil?
Dagan McNeil.
Dagan McNeil, my friend. How's life?
I got that movie just ruined pea soup for me. Mom's delicious pea soup recipe.
I like
the
peas.
ham hock.
Oh yeah,
you like pea soup? You enjoy? Pea soup?
Yeah. When I was living with her, when I was waiting for the house to get ready for those months, she was making pea soup pretty often, and I was like, "This is dope, dude." I like peas. Peas have a bad reputation, but I don't really understand why.
Good vegetable. Absolutely great vegetable. Yeah, Mom's pea soup, homemade with the ham hock in there, smoky, salty, just delightful. I can't eat pea soup now for at least a couple of weeks. It's going to be that period of just kind of forgetting about it. Has to wash over me a little bit.
It's interesting because you messaged me after watching and you're like, why did you make me watch this again? And I was so happy to watch it because I love this movie. And we're going to obviously talk about 1973's The Exorcist, but we'll get into all of that. Do you have anything you'd like to stretch your legs with before we begin our show today?
Here's something that's been frustrating me this week, but the more I think about it, the more I realize that this has long been a frustration of mine. And I don't know if you've ever heard of this before. I don't think you have this problem, but let me break it down for you quickly. I'm a pretty good speller. I always have been in school. I always got spelling, just learning spelling tests. I could look at something, memorize how it's spelled. And I guess just through reading over the years.
Yeah, I'm the same.
I do a bit of writing, right?
Right.
I'm a man of letters.
You are a man of letters, yeah. Sure. Sure.
I never had a problem really with spelling. It was something that always came a little more naturally to me. But even as a young kid, I realized I have a problem with spelling out loud, like spelling orally, vis-a-vis, for instance, a spelling bee. I could never do a spelling bee because even though I knew how to spell a word, I could write it on paper very, very easily. I couldn't enunciate it letter for letter. I would just stumble. It was like bird, and I'd be like B-Y-R-D. Like for some reason, just the sounds of the letters and everything. It was like I'm having a stroke. Every time I try to spell something out loud, it was like I was having some sort of brain fart. And then I realized that I think the problem really compounded, or I really realized it was an issue for me again when we had kids. And we had little ones, and you do the thing where you spell things out loud because you don't want them to know what you're talking about.
Right.
Which, by the way, we did until like 3 years ago. Like the kids were like 9 and 12, and we were still doing it. They were like, they would literally look like, what the? I would see them in the back seat of the car, being like, "Are they kidding?" Like looking at each other, dumbfounded. Like, are they?
Yeah,
joking?
they're getting like vocabulary words like perseverance and shit, and you're spelling SIHT or something.
But I never heard of anyone else having this issue where you're actually a competent speller, but you just can't do it orally. So I remember in spelling bees in school, they would be really frustrating. Oh.
Yeah, go on. I'm sorry.
We already had an old moment.
That's true.
I hate when I don't realize the old moments and you do, but that seems to happen a lot on the show.
Well, you're talking about how you can't do it orally. It's like, give me a break. That's also that's what she said as well. If you want to bring in The Office as well,
we always want to bring The Office into it.
Sure,
but yeah, I have, and the issue lasts to this day. It's still the same thing. What kicked it? You know what it was? I know what it was that did it for me. That reminded me. That was the harsh reminder this week. We had a Zoom meeting at work. I wasn't involved in this part of the conversation, but my boss or something said something. And everybody was misunderstanding, and he had to be like, no, and then spell the word like he was saying this. And then I was like, I would have messed that up. And it was like a 6-letter word. It wasn't like Scrabble level spelling. So have you ever heard of this? I don't think you suffer from this ailment.
No, I don't. But no, I don't know. Isn't it funny how when because you just brought it up, like when your boss is saying something and no one understands what they're saying, or like you do not get it. You know how you encounter that every so often? It's like, and they'll say it over and over again, and you're like, dude, what the fuck are you saying? What are you saying? And it's so weird how our minds are engineered. Like, that doesn't make any sense. Like, immediately, like, that's not a word. But why not? We're all just making guttural noises and sounds. That's all this is.
Right.
And for some reason, I'm just like, Dagan, it's really nice to see you today, brah. And so and for some reason, you know that's not a word. That's just not operable. But what confuses me more, and I say this all the time on Sacred Symbols because I'm always making fun of I like making fun of the audience on Sacred Symbols. It's fun. And how they write in sometimes. And sometimes you guys are just, it's illegible. It's like, what are you doing? Why can't you write?
Is that the
words?
Is that the juxtaposition of words? What is that?
I guess I'm confused. I don't know, man. I'm horrible at math. I'm horrible at all sorts of things. So I'm sure people look at it differently. But with something like English, right, or language generally, how can you not be a master of it when you're talking and reading all day for your entire life?
It's really true, isn't it?
You know how they say the 10,000 hour mastery level? Now think about how much you've written, read, and spoken in your life. You should all be grandmaster level English purveyors or the speaker of the language of your locality. That's always been. So it's not so much the reading out loud thing or the spelling out loud thing that gets me. It's more, I always say to the audience on Sacred Symbols, like when we get a letter once in a while, I ask, do you really write like this? Like, are you in an email at work writing like this? There was one dude that was writing in capitalizing the first word of every word. And I went on for about a half an hour about this letter, probably on the show, about how offensive it was. I was just like, dude, it was like coming from the heart where I'm like, oh my God, I really
it hurts
hope that you aren't doing this in like a professional setting or a collegiate setting. Please, God.
They may be getting your goat. Has that come to light?
Maybe, but
they know they're Colin.
They do, but I know the internet.
There you go.
And it never ceases to amaze me. So it's funny you bring that up because I always love busting their balls. I'm like, what is? But then Allie always makes fun of me when we get together and I'm like, someone asks like some math problem, like, oh, how many days away is that or whatever? And I'm just always wrong. She's like, dude, you have like no concept of numbers at all. It's like, yeah, that's how, it's in January. It's like, what? How many weeks away? And I'm like, 13. And they're like, not even close. Thank you, though.
That's kind of a cute trait, though. That's listen, everybody needs a chink in their armor. Everything you just said just makes me feel worse for not being able to spell out loud. By the way, reading out loud, I was always the best in my class. Teacher calls you to read a passage out loud, read a paragraph. Smooth. I treated it like an NES video game, like a speed run. Like
totally. I loved reading out loud. Don't
stumble, rhythm, don't mess up a word, maybe impress a little bit. Know the word that they think you don't know. Because you know how there would always be like a word or two where the teacher would help you or you didn't really know what it meant. But if you knew that word, if you brought it, if there was like an accent agu over or like a tilde over an N and you brought that pronunciation, you would surprise Miss Parry and she would be impressed. Right. Sneak a peek up. Make sure she gives the wide eye like, she acknowledges that.
Yeah, I'm reading over here. I'm reading. And it's funny because I loved that too. And isn't it funny how you would like try to do the numbers and skip ahead to see which paragraph you would read or whatever. And then like really scout it out.
Yes.
Practice. But then there would be like someone would get a short paragraph and you wouldn't really know. Would they just give them another paragraph and bump everything down one and someone else got the good paragraph and you got the shitty paragraph?
Brilliant.
I used to think about that all the time.
Dude, brilliant conversation. That is amazing because, I remember that so succinctly. And I remember, the kids that stumbled, the kids that needed a little more help with the reading, with the phonics, whatever. I remember genuinely feeling sympathy for them. Like, I wasn't one of those kids who like, come on, like say out loud, get impatient.
Today, Junior.
Today, Junior. I felt bad for those dudes and dudettes.
It's funny you say that because I did too, but I do like the idea, and I'm being earnest about this and honest.
Yeah.
I like the idea of learning to read by social pressure. Like, we're going to make you read in person in front of everyone over and over and over and over again for years.
Oh, shit. Is that what that was?
And I think so. Yeah.
I think so.
I think you want to practice reading aloud, of course, but I think a lot of it had to do with the embarrassment of not being the person that can read. And I hate to say that, but that's got to be part of the reason. I mean, you didn't want to be the one fucking up. That I believe in that sort of thing. That's why I like those kinds of checks, like those social checks. Like kids understand the currency of social acceptability.
Oh, God.
They don't care that they won't be able to read when they're an adult. They don't want to get made fun of. They haven't thought twice about. But I don't really think this is a problem anymore. Everyone has a phone in their pocket. So I really feel like we must be at virtually universal literacy in the United States.
You know what's funny about that? My knee-jerk reaction to that would be, or first thought would be, the phones and constantly having your face in the iPhone and the tablet.
How can you not read today?
Yeah. You would think the opposite, like kids aren't reading, but it is all reading. It's all
They're probably
reading.
not reading at an elite level. They probably don't know what a lot of the words mean if you're in a bad school or whatever, but I think you're getting by better today than... Like, I really think there were plenty of people in the U.S. in 1980 that straight up didn't know how to read.
Oh, absolutely.
I don't think that that's really happening today.
Yeah.
Like, straight up, don't know how to read.
It's probably way down. You're absolutely right. I mean, things like TikTok are purely, and I guess to some degree, things like Instagram, you don't need to read, but Twitter is certainly a literacy thing, right? I mean, it's all words. It's all about words. So that's a great point. Yeah, I hope literacy is way down because it was easy. Apparently not easy.
Way up. You don't want it to be way down.
Oh, wait. I mean, yeah, the illiteracy is way down. The literacy is way up.
Right.
But, it's so funny. Like you hear about people that faked it their entire lives. That's a whole nother other, man.
Wasn't there a story of a teacher? You know what I'm talking about? There was like a story of a high school teacher that couldn't read.
No way.
I got to find this. It's 100% real. Like I guarantee you it's 100% real. I'm sure people can go Google it. But there was like, I got to find that for you. Yeah. There's some dude that just basically didn't know how to read that.
Whoa.
But, whoa. Like Joey Lawrence. Now, a lot of people probably don't know. That's who I'm thinking when I do that.
Oh, of course.
But I wonder if no one, but I just wonder, that's so old. I wonder if people listening even know who the fuck Joey Lawrence is or what I'm even talking about. Whoa.
Was that Blossom that he was known for that part?
Yeah.
That was Blossom, right? He was the older brother, right?
Yeah. And the dad was like the
Blossom KnockBack coming in 2023.
Dude, it's so funny looking back at some of those old sitcoms. We'll get into it in a sec, but Blossom and the guy that played Darlene's boyfriend on Roseanne both ended up
his name
as main actors in Big Bang Theory,
right?
And probably made something like $5 or $10 million per episode at some point doing that show. I mean, those guys. It's so funny to look back at these actors that work fine. I actually really liked that character on Roseanne because he was they just used to bully him. They just bully the shit. David, I think his name was. They used to bully the shit out of him. I loved Roseanne. I thought that show was so funny, and it still is really funny.
That's going to play into today's conversation, I think.
Oh, interesting. Well, let's just get right.
Yeah, interesting juxtaposition.
Well, let's just get right into it then. For some reason,
right.
let's just segue right into it there.
All right.
We're trying to do some horror movies here for the month of October, leading into Halloween, and we went with The Exorcist for this week's movie. We went and did The Shining last week, so you guys can already listen to that. The Exorcist, of course, came out in 1973, at the end of 1973. I was looking at the box office numbers. It must be cumulative box office numbers over years, like it being released and re-released, but it's at $500 million gross, which is just outrageous. It's just an outrageous amount of money. And I think that, and this is based on, so The Exorcist is based on a 1971 novel. I've not read the novel, although I'd really like to. I looked at the cover of the original novel. I don't know if you saw it. And I was thinking to myself, are you kidding me with how fucking freaky this is? Even for I don't know if you've seen it. Like even for 1971, it's just unsettling. And
the cover of the book.
Yeah, the cover of the book. And I'm just so intrigued by this story, but I love Catholic horror. I think it's some of the best kind of horror. Christian horror more generally, I guess you can say, because you can think of things like The Witch. You can think of things like Children of the Corn, my favorite. Maybe we'll get to that this month. And I just think there's something about religiosity that is truly frightening. I think Catholicism, and to a lesser extent Orthodox Christianity, being the oldest forms of Christianity, have that necessary ancient mysticism going on. Like I'm totally fine if you're a Baptist, I don't care, or like a Lutheran, but you're only in a religion that's 400 years old. Catholicism's 5 times older. I mean, that's an extraordinarily old thing, right? Going back all the way to the first church. And
yeah, ancient. Sure.
So in there is this inherent, like I said, mysticism and fear of the unknown. And I always think about the early Christians. You were told, I mean, you were still told to this day, but imagine being told in 100, 200, 300 year, like AD, that yes, there was a man who was basically a mystic, who was the son of God, but also God, who was begot from this virgin birth and did all this crazy shit when he was alive. And with no settling influence from society or normalcy or modernity or anything, that's probably both really intriguing and actually really frightening. And that's what I think things like The Exorcist get into is the primal fear of the unknown. We talk very loosely about heaven and hell, about good and bad, about Jesus and Lucifer and all, or God and Lucifer, I really should say, or anything like that. But what is it really? What are you saying? How does this manifest? Who are the fallen angels, and who are all these evildoers, and what is their motivation, and how do they manipulate people and exist in this world to test your belief in God and all of these things? And we don't talk about it. Like we really, I think we mostly don't talk about it, by the way, Taken, because I think most people know that that's probably the thing that pulls the thread the most and loosens it all up, is to say, there is no hell.
Right.
That's preposterous. There is no devil. That's preposterous. But I think even if you're a believer, by the way, in Christianity, I think you can look at those things and say, like, I don't think that that's true. I don't know if you can be functionally within the various prescripts of the religion themselves, but I think you can believe in God and still, and a Christian God, and still not believe that there's a hell. But nonetheless, I wonder if any of that comports with you, and if it's the reason why you enjoy or find this movie so frightening. Because I think to this day, this movie is truly scary, and I think it's scary for reasons that go beyond what you see on the screen itself. I think it goes in again, I think, to those ancient mysteries. So, what do you think?
There's so much to unravel with this conversation, and I thought about it, and I was like, wow, has this movie specifically been talked about too much? Has this been done to death? And my answer is, the resounding answer is that you could talk about this movie at length for many, many years to come, and there'll always be something to say. There'll always be some rich conversation around this movie, because it just creates that environment for conversation, for breakdown, for exploring the origins, everything about it, the movie and the novel, the similarities, the dissimilarities, all of those things. And I think I was initially responding to that age-old hyperbole dating back to 1973, the legends, the infamous and notorious nature of this movie, that, you know, it's so disturbing, it's so horrifying, it's the way it rattled people back in the late 1973. By the way, this movie's I'm 20 days older than this movie. Came out December 26, 1973. So I'm just a few weeks older than this film.
Surprised mom and dad didn't bring you to see it.
You know what's funny about this? I don't know if you remember this. This is a really weird memory, because, of course, I'm going back to my origins. When did I first discover the film? When did I first consume this legendary beast of a film? And I think we never owned a lot of VHS tapes as a family growing up in the 80s.
No.
We had a smattering of a few odd, seemingly random things. We had like a copy of Godfather 2, like an actual copy, not a dub.
We had like a bunch of taped things too. Like we had Mary Martin's Peter Pan, which I was obsessed with. We had
that's right,
some Disney movies and all the rest. It's so funny what you're captive to when it's just what you have. It's like, yes, Mary Martin's Peter Pan might be one of the worst things ever. And
you were obsessed.
I loved it. And also Captain Hook in that is the best Captain Hook ever. But I digress. Go on and
maybe a poorly dubbed like film that from TV Ewoks movie we had in there. Right. We had Cocoon, like a weird sampling of movies that really seeming like, why do we have these? And I think for a while, an actual copy, not a copy of a copy, not a dub, but an actual boxed copy of The Exorcist was among those movies for a little while. So I always saw it, and I was you always knew. You just heard it in the background, the stories, the legendary sort of status of this movie that it was so frightening. It was so disturbing. It was absolutely forbidden if you were a kid growing up in the 70s and 80s. At least, to my knowledge, or that was my experience.
This movie was apparently horrifying to people.
If you look at the history of this film, I think we only witnessed that in very small samplings later on with, like, we talk about, like, with the Blair Witch, the way that disturbed people. And it seemed like it was a documentary film or a documentary film style. And that was the latest spin. But if you think back to the early 70s, now film was getting gritty already. Probably in 1968, the new wave of filmmakers were inspired by the French New Wave, and there was a desire for realism. And we already had things going up into, coming into 1974. We had gritty films already. We had Rosemary's Baby. We had Easy Rider, Midnight Cowboy, Peckinpah's Straw Dogs. I mean, that's a disturbing film. We had Panic in Needle Park, The French Connection. So we were going to get into The Deer Hunter, and we were going to get into Midnight Express and Chinatown and Cuckoo's Nest and all those things later in the decade.
Taxi Driver is a huge one, right? So people were already becoming accustomed to this new generation and this new exploration of film, where it was like, it wasn't just entertainment, popcorn, musicals, cowboys and Indians, Westerns, things like that. Film was changing, but it was still in the offing. So this was a shocking thing for people, for movie-going audiences, and it explores taboos. That's the other it's not afraid to go into that realm. And I think for me, what come down, when I texted you and then I watched it and I realized and just coming off The Shining, it might be an unfair comparison, right? Of Stanley Kubrick's The Shining, where it's a scary film. And these two films are often talked about in the same breath, but Kubrick's visuals, right? The moving camera, the complex shots, the colors, that steady cam, the expensive, sort of rich, wealthy nature of every frame. It's a visual tour de force, where this is hyper realistic, I think, almost brutalist in some fashion. And I think what the film is and why it holds up so well is that it's disturbing. It's an unpleasant movie. It's unsettling. I do think it's frightening, but I think it's only scary because of that realism that it manages to portray. And that's really when I got through it, when I got all the way through it. Now, make no mistake, I got through it late last night. It was like 1:30 in the morning. I had to cleanse myself by watching like the first 45 minutes of Ocean's 13, just something, a complete departure, something with levity. But I really enjoyed it. I really did enjoy watching The Exorcist this time around. And I realized all these things. And I realized it's not that it didn't really frighten the hell out of me, especially someone who's extremely squeamish and not good with horror. I really do find it, though, an upsetting movie, a disturbing movie. And even though I don't think the ending is necessarily unhappy, and there's just so much to say about that. Really, with something like The Shining, where we just came out of last week, where it's like a style. It's so rich in style. I think The Exorcist is a sort of absence or an abandonment of style. The only real artifice in the entire thing is the music and the audio. The sound design. I think that's really the only artifice in the entire thing. Otherwise, it's beautifully shot. It's beautifully acted. I think that's what really keeps me anchored. But really, the only style in the film is probably the audio component. Otherwise, it really does feel still very realistic. I think all of the comedy and the parody that it spawned over the years maybe dilutes it a little bit. Like, I kind of wish I could be a teenager in 1973 looking at the movie and really get that full-on shock, because now it's pop culture. I mean, there's Reagan pop vinyls and all that sort of thing, right? But I think really looking at it even now, it holds up in that fashion of realism, really a passion for getting this story on screen, and maybe even benefits with that retro patina where you have that sort of grittiness to the film. It's the early 70s.
the fidelity is not really there. The visual quality is not what we're known, decades later, what we have now. So sort of washed out color, I think that even adds to the horror. A very familiar Northeastern setting in the fall. There's so much to talk about with that. But, it's really, I could see why it's a lot of people's favorite, not only favorite horror film, but favorite movies, because even all these years later, I'm not sure it's been topped.
Yeah, it's funny. The Shining is more like an Ari Aster movie to me, where there's a lot going on here. And it's in the shot, it's in the negative space, it's in all of that. And when I think again of Midsommar, which I've been really going on and on about for years now, that reminds me a lot of The Shining for some reason, where it's all about the panning and the shots, and there's a lot more character play in that and whatnot, but with more of an ensemble. Where I see a movie like this, like The Exorcist, more like Poltergeist or even the slasher films, in that they're not exactly, you can tell that, like you said, it's very low rent compared to something like The Shining. Although The Shining is newer, I don't think that really matters. You can make them, because Clockwork Orange looks better than this, and Clockwork Orange is older. So they certainly are different movies stylistically, but it's funny because The Exorcist does one of the most artsy things that I think films would do that I don't think film really does at all today, which is those interstitial shots of the devil that they put in. It's like, first of all, that used to scare the shit out of me. I was making Michael laugh telling her that when I was younger, I would go and I would freeze that. I would like go on the tape and find it and try to scare the shit out of myself. Very similar to watching Nosferatu or something like that as a kid. And that's a very artsy thing to do, to make it all feel so unsettling, like you're in the experience, like you're feeling the grasp of the devil or the demon. I think it's truly brilliant in that way. I don't know if it would really work in that spiritual way, because The Shining isn't a spiritual movie. It's a horror movie, like a thriller. Not a thriller. It's like a character piece.
Yeah, I do think of The Shining as a thriller in many ways.
Yeah, maybe it is a thriller. And Exorcist, I think, there's a spaciness to The Shining that suggests that things don't happen. There's obviously this telekinetic stuff and all of this. Who the hell knows? Like when he's drooling and that noise is happening and all of that. Who knows what's happening and what isn't? It's fascinating. But I think what's so fascinating about and scary about The Exorcist is the Catholic Church believes this shit. It does.
Yeah.
And there's been a lot of tweaks at the various councils as they kind of get rid of some of this old, much more Orthodox style Catholicism, but that's what is so fucking scary about it. And I love the way it's presented in the story, where it comes through this is discovered through a secular, famous, wealthy household. So it just goes to show you that no one's immune. It's not like it's a fallen Christian or someone that's never even did anything wrong, just someone that's agnostic, and then someone that has money and all the best doctors and help. And even she is being drowned by the force of this demonic presence in her daughter's life. And I just dig that. Now, I want to ask you at the top, is the Northern Iraq stuff not some of the best part of the movie? I mean,
so good.
It's so scary. That's some of the scariest part. I forgot when we were watching it. It's been a while. I hadn't watched it in some time. And I was like, yeah, I totally forgot that this happens. And my favorite shot is the shot of the sun behind the statue. Horrifying. I mean, just horrifying. All natural shot. I mean, this is pre-microprocessor. They weren't doing anything with computers, anything at all, unless you were in the something the size of a room, and you don't get those lens flares and that lighting and whatever from computer aiding at this time. There's something that's so unsettling about that beginning, and then how it's just all about that. They don't really ever even, I don't know if they do in the book, but they don't really even ever get into the nature of the idol. And
no,
there's a lot of confusion about all of that. So what do you think about that whole ancient preface for the story that I think is so unsettling? In other words, and I think the later Exorcist movies get into this, but that this has happened many times, that this force of evil has been unleashed before.
The Iraq stuff works on so many levels. I mean, first of all, Friedkin and company actually filmed this in Mosul in northern Iraq. So they were on location. So this is legit, genuine, completely authentic. And yeah, again, there's so much to dimension to it, because now we know the legendary status of this movie. We're kind of hope to stay in Iraq because we know we're in for a wild ride once we get back to the States, right? So there's something comforting about being there, but also very clever misdirection in a way, because it really sets you up to not know what you're getting into. Again, think of audiences in 1973 over the holidays before that 1974 New Year's Eve ball drops in Times Square. Like, there's a lot of people seeing this movie. They don't know what they're in for. You know, once, of course, once the reviews come out, once the critics start with their articles and their news stories and everything. But there's something really cool about that, and also exploring the origins of this evil. And I also love the foreign setting because there's a great sense of foreboding with what they do. But of course, for us, it's a foreign place, an alien culture, a language we can't understand. So we know there's something sinister going on, but we can't articulate it because we can't really fully understand it as Westerners, which is also very frightening. Definitely. And then it reminded me, Kyle, of my initial delving into this movie back in college. My first year of art school, we were kind of forced, like it's often the case, we were forced to take a bunch of electives. And in order for me to strategically try to sidestep math, accounting, other things like U.S. history, sorry, Kyle, I loaded up my electives with live action filmmaking classes, which was actually kind of cool. I took a 16 millimeter class. I took a traditional film editing class where we were shooting and then splicing and cutting movies and using the moviola. It was antiquated, but it was kind of cool to go back to that. And then I took a film analysis class. I forget the teacher's name, but he was really intent specifically on exploring subliminal messages in film. And the very first thing we watched was The Exorcist. Now, in retrospect, it would have been cool if he let us watch it all the way through first, because we basically watched it in a very stop and start fashion, because he would freeze frame and then tell us like, oh, look at the hidden thing here, and look at the hidden lion sounds and snake sounds, and here's the face that Colin hates, and look at, they held it for 3 frames, and look at the next time they held it for 12 frames. And it was kind of cool as an animator to get that breakdown of like how long something would have to be on screen in order to register and evoke an emotion and all that kind of stuff. But that was my introduction to the film. I don't think I had ever seen the film all the way through before that college class. And he really lingered on the Iraq stuff, which is like the first opening 13 minutes of the film or something. So we really got a deep dive into that whole thing with Father Merrin and the Pazuzu statue and all the subliminal stuff going on. But I love it because it really does kind of set the tone for what's to come. But also it does kind of evoke that wanting to go into the book for me, which I still haven't read, because supposedly the book spells it out a little more about what Father Merrin's doing there and his sort of ancient struggles with exorcism, and the fact that he's been there and done that, and he's got a long history with this type of thing, and maybe that's what he's doing there in the first place. But it's brilliantly done, and it's one of those films where it's kind of a film inside of a film, right? The first 15 minutes is very unlike what you get for the rest of the journey, so it's kind of nice to have that departure. It leaves you wanting more.
Certainly. And I wanted to ask you also what you thought of the setting. We brought it up just briefly earlier, but Georgetown, Washington, D.C. I think this is a very interesting place to set this. It's incredibly impoverished even then, maybe even more then, but certainly still today. I mean, Washington, D.C. is kind of embarrassing. No offense to anyone that's from there. It is what it is, but it's just for a capital city. London, Tokyo, Paris, Washington, D.C. It's like, okay, good. I mean, even Mexico City. I mean, Mexico City is ancient. It's super cool. We have this kind of manufactured place, and it's to me, it's always been weird in my experience. It's part of the reason why I think shows like House of Cards were so good. Not only the political intrigue, but Washington as a place. It's very mysterious. Like, what is it? It feels like you're being watched. It feels like everyone is in on something. It feels like kind of fake and kind of just there for no reason at all. And I feel that here. And I think that setting is incidental because you find that the McNeils are not even local to this place. So it's just their intersection with the events, the characters, this work that the woman is doing, Chris. And I just find that an interesting component of the movie that I don't know that people focus on too much. I wonder if you have any feelings about Washington, D.C. and it being set in this area.
Yeah, I mean, I mostly know D.C. vis-a-vis its reputation. We went there on a skate trip in the mid-90s once and spent a few days there. So I got to kind of know, and I had really never, it's kind of a sin, but I had never really had any experience with that city prior to that. But it is interesting what you say, because it does have a bad reputation for being impoverished and the inner city being really hard. I mean, you could think of other places like Boston, Philly, Baltimore, of course, New York, certain parts of New York City. They kind of have the same thing going on, but DC in particular seems to add insult to injury because that's where as Americans, that's where our national government is housed. Like everything, and that's where the president lives. So you would just think by proxy that would be a nice area. And I think the outskirts of DC are very up and coming and maybe even a little bit, upper class.
Yeah, there are plenty of nice parts of Washington, but it's to your point that I think you would just expect a lot more, especially for a manufactured capital. That's what's so weird about it. It's not a capital that's just been there for 1,000 years and then became
true.
Or a city that was there for 1,000 years and then became a capital like London or Paris. So
right.
Yeah. Anyway, go on.
But the movie being set in DC in Georgetown, for me, for somebody, and for you, Kyle, for somebody from the northeastern part of the United States, it just feels very familiar to me, and I think that adds to the horror. It just looks like a historical American town. It looks like Cambridge. It looks like Boston. It looks like Philly. It looks like anywhere you could go in the Northeast that's among the older places in the country, before the expansion out west and all that kind of thing. It just feels familiar. And I think seasonally too, setting it in the fall, it just feels like a familiar setting. There's nothing exotic about it. It's not LA. It's not even anywhere in California like Poltergeist. It just feels, and again, this could be my geographical sort of experience with it specifically, but it just feels very familiar to me. And that adds to the horror. There's really nothing that makes it stand out. It looks like it could be just like the family who it affects and the seeming randomness of this demonic possession just seems like it could have, it just seems to add to that idea of this could happen to anybody anywhere. It always felt like that to me. And I think that was a strategic sort of thing in putting the movie together. Also, supposedly the book is based on a real life exorcism that happened in the 40s in Maryland.
That's like anonymous, right? It's like no one knows who it was.
Yeah. And we'll get into that,
right.
Where it's like, it's buried, whether that's the government doing that or the Catholic Church or a combination of both things. And that's I think that's going to come to a head at some point in this conversation, because we have to absolutely discuss the importance of that sort of thing.
Well,
I think that's it. I think that was the whole strategy. And supposedly, if you think about historically with exorcisms, there's only like one American case that's so well documented as that late 40s Maryland case with the little boy. And then a case or two in various parts of Italy, maybe in northern Italy, maybe even in Rome. So that's another interesting thing is I think that was another thing with this film. It's not only the sensationalism of putting this little kid in this predicament, which is definitely part of I got to see this. This sounds horrifying. That's taboo to put a kid like this in danger and make them cursing and all the business with the crucifix and the bed and everything like that. I mean, this is sensationalist fare, and make no mistake. But that's the other point of interest, I think, is we're exploring this thing that's never talked about, whether you're religious or not. And I think I never understood the taboo behind this, Kyle, but maybe you're religious, in some way or spiritual in some way, whatever that religion is, in which case you believe in good, in which case you must believe in bad or evil, because there has to be some kind of counterpoint to good. There has to be some sort of point of comparison for good. What is the opposite of good? If you believe in good, if you believe in Jesus or whoever your God is, then you naturally believe in evil. So what is the taboo with exploring the evil?
Right.
You know what I mean? What is the taboo with that? And maybe you're not spiritual, maybe you're not religious. You still live in this world, right? Then or now, obviously there's good and evil, right? Obviously it exists, maybe not to a person in a religious or spiritual context, but good and evil exists in the world. So that's another thing for me, is that taboo of like, oh, wow, we're going to explore, we're going to lift the rock up, on this thing and see what's underneath, which no one ever does. And I think, I would argue that it's still rarely done, where you're really having an examination, a realistic examination of what evil can be when it manifests itself, when it rarely manifests itself, and how horrifying the idea of that is.
Yeah, I totally agree that is fundamental to the film's strength. And I think Catholic-centric or Christian-centric horror generally. So as I said earlier, I totally agree that I understand why people are afraid. There might be some sort of taboo, like you're saying, because it's not to these people, to many people, it's not hypothetical. You don't want to fuck around with that. It's got bad juju kind of situation. And I kind of get that. And I you'll probably know more about it and we can get into it, but because I haven't read too much, but this was apparently a pretty cursed production too, in some way. And apparently went over budget like 3 times because of all the problems that were going on. So it's amazing.
I think 9 people died.
Yeah, it's crazy. Like
attached to the film.
It's very interesting. Poltergeist was one of those too, right? That had weird shit about it. And so I totally get that there's that component to it. And I it's weird because I'm a secular person. I consider myself an agnostic, maybe a deist of some sort. I don't really believe in an active God or an active devil or anything like that. But you're right that, see, my theory is that good is just a thing. It's an achievement, let's say, and it has an opposite, but we are inclined due to our own survival instincts to get along. There is no reason for us to be fighting with each other, and over time immemorial, we will have come to this point where we live in society, and you and I are talking over a camera and having this conversation. In other words, I just think that's the natural way of things, and you can disrupt that, but it feels wrong. Like we've in other words, we've been instituted with evolutionary things where what's wrong, you're going to pay the price, it's going to feel bad, it's going to hurt, all these different things to stop you from doing things that you shouldn't do. And I don't need a book to tell me that. That's just my thing. Like, I'm going to live a moral life. I'm not going to be any better if I became a Christian. I'll tell you that. Like, I already live my life like a Christian.
Right. At least, I see what you mean.
So, yeah. So, but I understand people wanting to not poke and prod that, because it's different than saying like, Freddy haunts my dreams. It's like, who gives a shit if Freddy haunts your dreams? It's not real. We can watch that. We can enjoy that. But you're talking here about them reading the Roman rites. I mean, these are real things, and
you're rocking the boat.
Right. And you're doing your Our Fathers and Hail Marys on your rosary, and you've got your priests. And I think even in commentary on priesthood, I couldn't help but read that one priest is gay, openly gay.
Sure.
And
Father Dyer.
Right. And I think that there's something being said there too in the commentary on Catholicism, perhaps, just in its many contradictions.
I have wondered, Kyle, if Father Intentola in The Sopranos was based on Father Dyer. Sort of that same thing where he seems to be
interesting.
He seems to enjoy his food and drink,
right,
and his parties, and maybe he's kind of a come on for Carmela and Ro. He's around. He's kind of taking advantage of their niceties and their wealth and all that kind of thing. I thought about those two characters linked to each other, and I was like, "There's something there." With
interesting.
Maybe David Chase used that.
He's an interesting character in The Sopranos.
Definitely.
Oh, yeah, really, really. Because you don't really know what's going on with him and Carmela, and like what his orientation is and all that. Yeah, good shit. Yeah, good pull. And so I like that it plays with the mores of the way things work and exposes them. I mean, it exposes Catholic poverty and the contradiction of that. Look at the way his mom's living. Look at the way they're living. I know they take vows of poverty, but then look at Rome. I mean, of course, it's just insane. None of it really makes any sense. God bless, literally and figuratively, because I really don't care what you believe. It's totally fine. But I wanted to ask you, Dag, as someone who I think is closer to belief or is a believer, you go to church, don't you? Still?
Yeah. Most of the time, I'd say I'm like 3 for 4.
Yeah. Wow, that's pretty good. So
not bad.
What do you believe in exorcism? I mean, do you believe in possession and then the ability to exorcise? Is this something that, in other words, is this something that speaks to you on that spiritual or faith-based level, or is it something that is from the mystical era of Christ, which is what I was bringing up earlier, where there are so many people should read about the Council of Constantinople and Nicaea and all these different places where they're making the rules of Catholicism, and they believe a lot of shit. They believe a lot of shit back in the day,
man.
Like a lot of shit. There are people that think you can be Jesus or invoke his power and do all this stuff, and they had to slowly whittle all that stuff away. It's fascinating to read about, and I've been reading a lot about the history of it recently for reasons. So it's just on top of mind. But I'm wondering, where is your mind at for, as a believer, in terms of interacting with this?
Yeah, you know what? And the movie does go into that a little bit, which is another reason to explore the book, I bet, where it's that faith versus science thing where, Karras does explain at some point, like, with developments in science, especially in mental health, that basically what he was saying in not so many words is that Catholicism was changing and evolving with those advances in medicine, especially as applied to mental health. And that is interesting. But yeah, for somebody who, I held on to my faith. I'm a relatively spiritual guy. I have a lot of problems. This isn't really a topic applied to this conversation, but I do have a lot of problems with the Catholic Church specifically. But the way I look at it is that I look past, not in a disrespectful way, but I look past the priests and the reverend and Monsignor and all that. Even to some degree, I would say, the higher ups as far as the Catholic faith and the Pope and the Vatican and all of that. And I kind of just look to the man, like for me, it's about Jesus and what I believe Jesus is and how I believe he would have been and how accepting he would be, he is, and all that kind of thing. And I look past the human element because they're just men. And that was what was always kind of instilled in me. But I take great sort of exception to not wanting to explore the dark side of things, because if we believe in all of this, what's wrong with kind of exploring the other side? Now, as somebody who's religious, or as everybody on earth knows, good and evil don't manifest themselves physically to us. And I guess that's really the idea of faith, no matter what faith you go in for, right? The idea of faith is believing without seeing, right? So just like
blessed are those that believed and did not see. I'm sorry.
Exactly. Well, just like the idea of an exorcism having to be a necessity because of evil manifesting itself. We also, on the other hand, never see Jesus, right? We never see an angel coming down and revealing
there's
themselves.
Zero proof.
That's the thing, is that, and that's what's so striking about this movie. And I think that's what scares people, is the idea of these religious entities, whether good or evil, especially evil, manifesting themselves and revealing themselves physically in our world, in our perceptible dimensions in some way, is a frightening notion because of its rarity or almost complete non-existence. And the fact that they could cross into this human plane, that we don't have to wait to get to heaven. We don't have to wait to get to hell. And what this movie eventually answers, and if you watch the movie and you really pay attention, it's very slow. Even when Dr. Karras is confronting Reagan and Pazuzu and the devil inside of her for the first time, or the first two maybe initial times, and is splashing with the holy water, and it's writhing and suffering and screaming in pain, and then he reveals that this was tap water. So there's some chicanery going on here. You know what I mean? That what is really happening? The movie really pulls you along, but eventually, when Karras and Merrin are performing that exorcism, at some point in the film, the shoe does drop, and it's revealed that this is a real thing. You know, Reagan is levitating. The demon knows a lot. It's speaking foreign languages. Everything Catholicism says as a litmus test for exorcism and possession, demonic possession, is answered at some point. At that point, it's not only revealing the manifestation of this ancient evil, it's basically telling you that Catholicism is real, right? It's actually, so if you had this on film, it would be a world, and you had proof positive that this happened, which basically answers the existence of Christ, answers the existence of Satan, and basically kind of just says, yeah, Christianity is, that's it, right?
We'll plunge the world into complete chaos of that.
Complete chaos. It's like, it is like the same thing, or maybe even more so, of finding proof positive of alien life. You know what I mean? How much world altering of a discovery that would be. And this movie does that. So not that they have it recorded, and, you know, they do have it audio recorded at some point, but who knows where it's going to go after this. And I'm not talking about Exorcist 2 and 3. I'm talking about where would the world then head having this information and this proof of that's, you know, for thousands of years had never been proven. Now in 1973 in Georgetown in America, it's been proven. So that's really, for me, it's more interesting than Taboo. It's like, why can't we explore the battle of good versus evil and the fact that once in a blue moon, the battle's fought here in our perceptible dimension on Earth. And I don't know, for me, it's like, yeah, it is believable that this exists. And there is also, I don't know, like an allure to me, an almost kind of hybrid mashup of religion and Indiana Jones, of a priest who is able to, or even specializes in exorcism. There's something really cool about that to me. Totally. And does that exist today? And, you know, knowing that the Vatican is basically a paramilitary organization, right? I mean, they have an intelligence, you know, like the Mossad or the CIA, like they operate like that. So to think that these people could exist is interesting and cool to me. I don't know. I just think it's really neat. It doesn't offend me. Like, I can't see being offended by a movie like this. It goes into, again, very sensationalist territory with a little 12-year-old girl masturbating with a crucifix and all of these things. But again, if you're realistically trying to portray evil and evil corrupting an innocent and all of these things, that's what you would think of. You know, the real evil wouldn't pull punches. And I think that was a really bold thing to do 50 years ago for film. And it is odd to think that very rarely has that been still to this day done. And maybe it's because of that fear of backlash. But for me, again, it's not offensive. It's a realistic portrayal of what I think it could be.
Yeah, there is. I agree with you. And I don't know. I just don't, even if I were, maybe it would change because it's easy for me to say on the outside, but if I were a believer, I just don't see why fictional representations of it in some way would be fundamentally offensive to me. If your belief system was so strong, what do you care what I think about it?
Right.
That's always been a great mystery to me too.
That's a great point. That Teflon should exist.
See, the thing is that I don't not believe that God exists. Double awful negative and bad grammar. But it's that there's nothing I see in the world or in the universe that can't be explained by science. So it's not to say that I think that God didn't snap his fingers, create a single cell organism and create it to this day, or go somewhere in evolution and manipulate it in some zoo hypothesis like situation or whatever. I don't know. I see a scientific answer for everything. And so that to me is satisfactory. There would be no satisfying scientific answer to why she's crab walking at rapid speed with blood coming out of her mouth and her bed is shaking and all this, and she's throwing up pea soup. And so that would be regardless of if you're religious or not, that would be an unsettling and unmooring thing. In fact, I think maybe this is what you're getting at, is that it would suggest that you were the one that was right and I was the one that was wrong. It would almost be harder for me to wrap my mind around it than you. It's like, well, yeah, you've been fucking preaching this forever. And well, here it is. I mean, it might be surprising that it's actually real, but at least you believed it in some way. So I like that whole interpretation of it as well. And I like that it's represented through this early 70s American medicine lens. And I love how the science doesn't have the answer, that the fundamental focus of the story is how they can't figure it out, that they're wrong, that they're prescribing a riddle and they think it's that and they think it's this and they're doing spinal taps. And I love how scary they represent the machines. It's an intentional thing. These things almost feel like alien technology. It's like, relax, sweetheart. We're going to get an X-ray and then we're going to basically put you in like an inch away from the pod racer laser beam, going before your face or something.
Hard to watch. So cold, so clinical.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And so
sterile.
Right, exactly. And so that I think is a really brilliant artistic representation of like an intentional way to present doctors. They're all in a room. None of them know what the fuck they're talking about.
Committee.
They're all right. There's a committee. They're all guessing. Some of them are smoking cigarettes and stuff, which I think is also intentional.
So great. Right.
Because at this point, everyone knows that cigarettes are bad for you. So like doctors should definitely be the one. I mean, that's not a huge deal. It's just something observable. And I think that there's a juxtaposition presented by the sterileness and the presumptuousness of science in that era, and still to this day, I think, and the mystical, stoic, ancient, unusual, unbelievable sort of shit that happens apparently in religious circles, whether it's the Shroud of Turin or the crying Mary statue or whatever it is. It's just it does test the bounds of that, and I really dig that a lot. Do you where are you on some of the other random things they talk about, like a Ouija board and stuff? Do you believe in the Ouija board, the communing with the other side?
I wondered if this is where mom, oh no, it's not, because mom always had a real resolute fear. She forbid Ouija boards. And she told us a story about when she was young and messing around with the Ouija board. And I forgot what the word for word, how it played out, but she might have been 11, maybe a young teenager, maybe 13. And she was messing around with the Ouija board, and supposedly it was working. And it was basically, in not so many words, it was saying some creepy shit. And I wonder if this is where she got that, because the Ouija board sort of comes out, is revealed at the beginning, where it seems like maybe Reagan is suffering from these early signs of possession. It's also, it's funny what this movie draws out and sort of pulls up to the surface for me too, because it really does make me understand agnosticism or atheism, because I think I do have this part of me where I'm like, yeah, human logic, or maybe even just common sense, would dictate that, yeah, of course it's easy to follow a religion that says, isn't it an easy and convenient to say, like, look, you go in for belief and faith, and here's the rule. You believe blindly. There's never going to be any tactile, palpable proof of this thing existing. You believe without seeing. And at the very end, it's going to be revealed. At least that's what Catholicism says. And of course, there's many religions, but that's the religion that I know. And then it's like, whoa, yeah, of course. That's really easy to say. I'll play along. But isn't it convenient that there's never going to be any proof of this thing? There's never going to be there's never going to be a proper payoff during my time here on Earth to make me realize that what I'm saying or what I'm going in for has any proof of even existing. So it's basically like, no, and then Jesus or God says, yeah, that's faith. But here's the scary thing for somebody, I think, of faith, which the movie sort of pronounces, is that evil, right? Satan was a corrupted angel, formed his own thing because of his resentment, his fear, his envy, his jealousy, his hatred, his anger, all those type of things, manifested himself in starting his own kingdom, right? And that was the antithesis to heaven, to Jesus, to God. But the thing is, because of the nature of evil, they will manifest themselves if they can on earth. If that's part of it, they have no sort of compunction about doing that. But goodness will never. We're already told that. We'll never see God. We'll never see proof positive of Jesus here on earth. We have to wait till we get to the kingdom of heaven, all those things, right?
Or when we do,
that's
it's
scary.
over, right? Like, I mean, that's the whole thing.
Once you
like
see those signs, judgment is already starting.
Right, exactly.
Right?
So
People are already
it's the end
being
of
shepherded.
all things. Right.
So that's a frightening thing to know, that even when evil manifests itself, and I guess we kind of see that in the world, if you go in for that again, is that are the forces of good bringing a proper fight? Can they even do it by their nature? Even if they could do it, they won't do it, right? We're never going to see the sword of Michael come out of the clouds and slay a demon. Like, we're told we're never going to see that. But please believe it. So I do that and that side of me, I guess that's where the conflict arises in me, is that I do understand. I'm compassionate and definitely understanding of an atheist or agnostic standpoint because of the very nature of religion and what's required to really be a part of that, if that makes sense. Sure. And I think the movie really kind of brings that to a boiling point for me, because Marin has his crucifix that he kisses and puts down. He has his vial of holy water. He has his Bible. He has his sash. He seems like a true believer, right? Whereas Karras, his faith is being tested. And I think that's one of the wonderful parts of the story, one of the wonderful characters. But those are the only tools. And it seems to be working, but we don't really know. And it just kind of, that whole battle and that whole act of the exorcism only seems to bring out more questions in a way, right? Is this real? Is any of this real? And I kind of love that. I kind of love that. It speaks to the very nature of religion, I think.
Yeah.
And the mystery of it.
Well, I'm glad you brought up the thing with Karras too, because I like how he's torn between science and, I mean, it's literal. It almost beats you over the head. He's torn between science and faith. He's a man of science and also a man of faith. And he doesn't believe that the contradiction can exist. He can't understand it. And it's he's the one human, or one of the humans that's shown proof that of the insanity. But that's one of the things I wanted to ask you about, Dave. Here in my notes, I made note of this, is one of the ways that this movie doesn't work. And one of the things that I think is a little silly about the movie, and I wish that they could have written this in a better and a stronger way, is it takes the mom too long to be like, this is insane. What is happening here? She sees probably 3 or 4, maybe 5 supernatural things before she really accepts that she needs to talk to an exorcist or whatever. And I do like the scene with the doctors where they're basically admitting that this might work, but then kind of come back and say it's not a faith thing. It's not real. It's that they think it's real and all of this. So they're still like not admitting that they don't really know, which is great. But did that stand out to you or bother you at all? Because that really did stand out to me. I just was like, dude, she just crab walked in an unnatural way, foaming at the mouth. And I mean, put 2 and 2 together here. I mean, I understand I'm not in that situation. What would I do? But don't we know when we see something that is real and something that isn't? And then she sees the bed shaking. She jumps on the bed. She's trying to tell these people, the doctors are like, well, that's just, it's like, dude, no, I was in there. The bed was going not like, what could do that? Did that stand out to you at all as being kind of a weak link in the story?
Yeah, absolutely, dude. I think eventually, I mean, Ellen Burstyn's wonderful. I think eventually the level of desperation and her kind of arriving at that boiling point of just wanting an answer, and her seeming, her anger and her frustration and her horror, like it all comes to a head. But for me, I just, again, I'm putting myself into the movie. From the moment I heard those quote unquote rats scurrying around the attic, I would have been on a Concorde. Yes, we would have reinvented the Concorde. I would have been in Rome already looking like, dude, you guys got to come over here. Like something's definitely wrong here, type of thing. So it does, for the movie and for drama, you have to reach that climax or that pushing point, that turning point of like, all right, now we need action. Supposedly in the book, I heard, again, I really want to read it, that going through Karras and going through the various scientists and doctors and hospitals and committees and all this thing, eventually they arrived at, I don't know if it was a Methodist or an Adventist sort of priest. And eventually those priests said, like, look, we're kind of throwing our hands up too. There's one more thing we could try. Supposedly the Catholics claim to have this thing called exorcism, and the priests of this other sect of Christianity turn them on to the Catholics and say the Catholics claim that they could deal with this. You got to go see like a Jesuit priest. And that's kind of how it all transpired in the book. In the movie, it's a little more streamlined. And, it centers, of course, around Karras, who is, as you said, Kyle, a man of science, also a man of the cloth. Not only that, a medically trained, he said he went to Harvard, trained at Johns Hopkins. I mean, these are some of the best medical institutions in the world, right? And not only that, but he also has the psychological training as a psychiatrist for, the priesthood, for the Catholic order. So, but he so he has an understanding of all of this, and he has that, I guess, that conflict, which is really interesting. But yeah, I think there's also something that the movie does that I think is really cool that I never realized before. And basically saying, like, here's this woman in Mrs. McNeil, right? She has this daughter suffering from some unforeseen ailment, but here's how it's going to come out. All the money, all the wealth, all the privilege, all the assets, all the access in the world is not going to help you with this problem. This is the great leveler, right? This seeming, not only the horror of this seeming random possession and possessing this innocent 12-year-old girl, but also the fact of all your worldly resources can't help you. And I love the strategy of that. And even though she's extremely wealthy and she's a movie star and all of these type of things, there's still a real realism here. And that's where the Roseanne thing comes in for me, is would this movie have been scarier and even more grounded if you took on a very blue collar Roseanne type thing where it's happening to this very random, typical lower middle class American family? And you have that sort of, you sort of have that thing where they don't have a lot of resources. The house is beat up. It's weathered. It's in various states of disrepair. Maybe they're somewhat impoverished. They're living paycheck to paycheck or whatever. But I kind of like the reality of what this is saying. It's like, this is a realistic setting. We're in the Northeast. It feels familiar. But there is something extra realistic about saying everything you own, and you own more than most, the top 1%, can't help you here. There's something really scary, again, very frightening about that. And I think I think that's the way it was in the book too. And I love that.
Yeah, I think that I agree with you, because you'd have to think about what does working with more of a Roseanne style Connor-like family and what they bring to the table, like what does that introduce to the story, and then what would the exit of a wealthy person with means reduce from the story. And I think that would just be a different story entirely, unsettling for maybe a different reason. Maybe they're more in touch with it. Maybe they're more of people of faith. They're more in touch with what could be going wrong. No one's listening to them because maybe they're not taken very seriously. Maybe the church doesn't take them very seriously because they don't donate enough or whatever the case may be. I'm writing my own story here, so I don't want to get too deep into it.
They probably would, the poorer family would have probably learned faster. That they would probably have to arrive at brass tacks sooner and just automatically consult the Catholic priesthood and just they didn't have the money for all the medicine anyway. So
what did you think of the effects as they were in the film? How do you think that it was portrayed? I didn't look at all into how they did anything. I can say that in just watching it, I couldn't see the seams of anything really, like how it was happening. It looked great to me. I just love practical effects. And again, from an era where you had no real choice, I guess you could use miniatures and do other things like that if you wanted to, but sure, there was no computer aided choice back then. So I'm not saying that shaking a bed, making her levitate, all of that is, I don't think any of that, especially obviously the makeup and all of that, I don't think any of that's necessarily industrial lights and magic level impressive, but it's good. And I even dig the interstitials, like the interstitial demon shots look great. This is apparently a woman in makeup, but So what do you think about that?
I think, again, 1973 shot, some of it in 1972, all practical. And I think it is very impressive for the time. I mean, the makeup is really cool. I mean, Reagan's gangrenous sores and her cuts, I mean, it really holds up, whatever kind of contact lenses they're using there and the lighting. I think it really is cool. And just the practical solutions and problem solving for shaking the bed with various, motorized hydraulic devices behind the wall and having to figure those things out without the assistance of the computer. Again, like there's something that really smacks of inventiveness and ingenuity back in that era because you had to figure it out, and a real desire to make it look real with the wind blowing and the elements flying around the room. I would argue that that stuff looks better than Poltergeist 10 years later. I think Friedkin and crew really did an awesome job with that. And I was finding this struggle a lot again, and I think unfairly comparing it to The Shining in that everything was so successful in the way they pulled everything off. Everything is still very believable and it holds up even now, which of course that's a hard feat to pull off in the modern age because we're treated to such amazing special effects now and computer assisted everything and just all the visual effects that we're used to vis-a-vis the computer, but it holds up really well. But it got me to thinking of the level of realism that the movie was still achieving. I think because of the practical shooting, William Friedkin's documentary background, he has a very work-a-day approach to filmmaking where nothing, especially in this film. Now, go back and look at the French Connection again, like and the movie after that he did after The Sorcerer, which is an undersung, amazing movie. But this one in the middle here, there's a real sort of practical, philosophy to shooting the film where nothing's too fancy. Nothing's taking you out of the reality of the film. The stress, again, seems to be reality in the shooting, in the performances, in the lighting, in the juxtaposition of shots. There's a real sort of ethos for just trying to suck us in with something that looks realistic. But at the same time, everything is really brilliantly done. It's brilliantly acted, very believable. And the effects go hand in hand with that. I think they're real enough and authentic enough to not take us out of the movie. And the movie still feels very realistic to me. And I think that's what makes it so upsetting is that everything about it just seems like it's genuinely happening.
What do you make of this idea? And I just wrote this down. It's kind of something we touched on earlier, a time and place thing with this movie, but I find it unsettling. You think December 1973, but you think about what 1973 means, like what it means to be there. You were there, but you were not really cognizant, but
sure,
obviously, but we're talking about over the air television, over the air radio, landlines. That's it. And you go home and I just feel like there's something scarier about even subjecting yourself to horror then. Because today you can come home and turn on the TV, turn on any television you want, go on YouTube, Skype someone, text someone, go on the internet and see what's going on. Just quickly distract yourself and make you realize like, oh, none of this is real and none of this is happening, which is again why I think doing horror in the modern day is so challenging. But I love it's as you said, to have been able to see it then, but have also experienced it then with the mystery of it and really no way to protect yourself or shield yourself from it. I'm sure it was horrifying. I was wondering if you considered that.
Yeah, I mean, what were we going to do at this in 1973? Go home and play a board game, pacify yourself with Monopoly or whatever 3 channels you had on UHF. Like, it's so interesting to think about. Yeah, it really took. I mean, this movie, I think once word of mouth was established, which I'm sure was right away, I know this movie became like a rite of passage for people. It was like a proper endurance test. Like, oh, so-and-so fainted during this movie. I have to go see this and I have to get through it and I have to stay in the theater. I can't walk out. Like, this became a proper event, just to see this. And you had to see it on the big screen back then. It wasn't coming to home video in 5 months.
Right.
Like in the 80s and into the 90s. And now it's so interesting to think about a real genuine 1973 context. And I think a lot of what's at the heart of that is sort of confronting the taboo of putting the little 12-year-old girl, a proper innocent in this situation, not just because of the harm, the physical harm of being possessed by a demon, but in the actual things that she's saying, the cursing, telling the priests to F her. And again, the whole thing with the crucifix masturbation.
Let Jesus, fuck you.
I mean, that was, dude, Sam Peckinpah be damned. Like, I know films were getting grittier in the 5 years leading up to this, but they weren't. I mean, it was still in the offing. It wasn't decades of real gritty film and, pulp and, all of these things, exploitation movies and all that thing. This was the beginning of that, where film was coming out of that whole thing of, popcorn entertainment and, again, Westerns and comedy and all of there were, and big, Spartacus and Ben-Hur and all of these things, right? Where it's like these big movies and Hollywood and the studio system, that was all changing, but it was right in the beginning. And I'm sure it was shocking, but I do still think that taboo of putting a little kid in that situation is something still rarely done. And of course, it's another knockback. So we got to mention Ari Aster. He's one of the only dudes to have done that. He did that with Hereditary. And I think there's other filmmakers, young filmmakers like Rose Glass, who might take it to the next level. Well, I don't think Saint Maud was the answer, but I think these two might do it. I would put what's his name, who did The Rich, Rob Egger, in the same category, where they might be the ones to finally do a movie scarier than The Exorcist. And I would argue Hereditary is pretty close. But
yeah, Hereditary is scary.
It's a scary movie. But it is interesting that the fact that it's still rarely been done, that horror has rarely been done to this level in almost 50 years, just automatically makes me divert back to 1973. Like, people must have been blown away. They must have been blown out of their seat by not only what this movie did, but what a film is capable of. Now, you could do it in books. You could do it with the written word. It's a little, I don't know, a little less dynamic when you do it with the novel because of the nature of just looking at printed words on a page. But when you do it with the visual medium of film, dude, that's moving pictures and sound and color, full color on a big screen. Like, that's, dude, this must have really, you could see, I mean, there's video footage of people coming out of the theater and being like, so-and-so fainted. And they were just like, this movie's evil and I got to get out of here. Like, people trying to get out of the lobby. You see the popcorn being made in the back. Like, I got to go. Like, this is fucked up, type of thing. But I can understand that. And you're right. There was no creature comforts to escape to.
Right.
It was the TV and the radio.
Right. That's exactly the essence of it, is just this notion of just inescapability, especially if you live in the boot. Imagine living where we lived in Murray Court and Brookhaven, going home to that big house, couple TVs, you can watch basic cable on or whatever, and some radio, and that's basically it. And your landline, if you guys want to talk to someone, you get a phone call, you probably fucking shit yourself when the phone rings.
If you get home after midnight, there's nothing even on TV.
Right. You're going to put on
just
infomercials. Yeah. And then God forbid you put on one of these stations at 5 a.m. and you see the Indian, fallout signal. And you're really going to start melting down. Dude, I'm old enough to
remember that. That's fucking crazy.
So yeah, it's funny because I like when shit disturbs people, or Well, let me back up. Why is it okay for something to touch us, art to touch us in these positive ways, or even these predictable negative ways? Man, that was a really brutal rom-com. Man, that was a really brutal thriller, a war movie, or something that's just like, Jesus, this is harrowing. But the second it makes you feel uncomfortable in some really deep and dark way, there's like a taboo, like you said, or to use the word that we used earlier, rather, to say that we can't touch this or we can't go here or whatever. And I'm like, dude, it's awesome that people were running out of the theater. That rules. That people were fainting. If I were the filmmaker, I'd be like, this is phenomenal. This art is. It's not like it's making you have a seizure because of flashing lights. It's the presentation of the art that is making you seize up. And I don't know. I think it's a job well done. It's not like you're making a children's movie. It's called The Exorcist.
No punches put. And you could see, like, really, whether it was Blatty, whether it was Friedkin, cast and crew, like, no punches were pulled. Like, they went all in for it. It's a genuine attempt at making an honest movie, I think. And supposedly, when they screened it, or maybe it was even a rough cut at this point, this makes me laugh, for like a handful of Warner Brothers executives, one of them stood up and was like, we can't just bury it. It doesn't, just take the financial hit. We can never put this out. Now, he was overruled. But the fact that a professional film executive said, like, this is a bridge too far. We cannot go public with this thing. It was like hard. I think he left. I think he had left the studio over it. To think that it had that sort of effect on professional film people is really interesting to think about. And, Friedkin he was a really honest filmmaker. I just saw a great blurb with him on YouTube. It's like a minute and a half. It's a snippet of a conversation or an interview he did. He must have had a fallout with Al Pacino. I'm not even sure what he worked on with Al Pacino, but they asked him, the interview was like, what do you think of Pacino? And Friedkin was just interrupted the guy and was like, you know what I think of what Al Pacino said? I could give a fucking shit. Or something like that. He was like, I don't give a. He was like, I don't give a fuck through a rolling donut or something like that. It's shocking. It's like he's fucking pissed.
That's
like
awesome.
he had that reputation of just kind of like, that was, this is it. Like, this is that he was that type of, I guess, mercurial or that type of thing. But yeah, just a really honest dude. And I love the vision. I love this movie because, again, that naturalism or brutalism, realism, but there is some type of imperceptible style in that. Maybe that is the style, is everything in consideration of a realistic portrayal. The lighting, the acting, the framing, the rhythm, the shot composition, the music, but there's a style in there. There's still a style in there. It's not Kubrick. It's not the perfectionism of Kubrick. In fact, that opening dolly shot or establishing shot of Georgetown, the camera is shaky. Like Kubrick would have never went in for that shot. Right, it wasn't perfect. But yeah, there's something really interesting about this film for me, and I feel good because I'm less scared of it than I used to be. Again, I think I was responding to that hyperbole, that I don't want to say exaggeration, because it is a film that I feel like you have to physically confront in a way. And I think I almost go in trying to test myself because it's almost 50 years later. And I'm like, come on, people 50 years ago were going to the movie theater and seeing this on the big screen. And then again, like you said, going home to these dark houses with little creature comforts. They didn't have satellite radio or 1,000 channels on the TV or YouTube or PlayStation 5. Like, they had to go home and deal with...
Yeah, you can't put on your headset and talk to someone in fucking Mongolia right now if you wanted to.
There's no escape. The escapism was such a narrow road back then. It's not the super highway that we have now,
Where are you on the using the child in fucked up roles thing? Are you to me, I mean, it's, again, easy to say for me. I am not the filmmaker and I'm also not a parent or the parent. I'm like, yeah, man, like whatever. You need children to be able to do realistic roles. Doesn't say anything about them. It doesn't say anything about the people making them do it or asking them to do it or their parents. It's acting. And I was thinking about that a lot recently, especially with I'm on the third season of Stranger Things, which I think is pretty bad. I got to be honest with you.
Yeah,
The third
you're not
season,
digging
it's
it?
just not. I'm just going to try to just get through it. And man, I'm like, man, what the fuck? Just totally lost the essence in my mind of what it was. But that first season in particular is really dark, and they're young. I don't want to spoil it, but there's a scene where Six like basically like murder, like kills a bunch of them.
Yeah,
and,
Tetsuo style. Yeah,
right. And I thought, I was like, that's pretty heavy, but I think you have to find the mature actor. I think you got to find the good parents and the good teachers, the right filmmakers and staffs, crews. And so it's pretty disturbing to see a little girl stabbing herself in the vagina with a crucifix saying, "Let Jesus fuck you." Yes, dude. I completely agree. But that's the idea. It's a film. It's a film. It reminds me, I always make fun of Fallout 3, which I love, but in Fallout 3, there's a settlement, and this is not a spoiler, but you've also had 14 years to play it, so just anyone that's complaining. There's a settlement you encounter or can encounter that's all children. And famously in Fallout 3, you can kill anyone you want in the game. You can fight and attack and kill anyone. Everything has consequences. Like you can go into a town like Megaton and kill the bartender, and you'll just never be allowed to go in there again. They'll attack you every time you go in. You'll never get any side quests, all that. So the game is deep with those kinds of consequences, but they won't let you shoot any of the kids. And like you can't even aim your gun at them.
Oh, wow.
And this was obviously to get through the ESRB probably and all that. But I thought in my mind, I'm like, I understand, but isn't that a little weak? If I want to go in here and bust in here and kill these kids in this game, I mean, that says a lot about my character and his morality level, but to what end is this any worse than what we're doing elsewhere? And that's kind of what I think. Why is this the precious thing? I guess it's because it has to do with kids. I understand, but within the confines of art, within the confines of entertainment, don't we understand the difference? And I think that, dude, we all know, including your kids and others, like we know kids that kind of get things from a young age. And so you can go to I don't remember the girl's name that played Reagan. I can't think of it. Linda Blair. Linda Blair, of course. Is like you can go to a young Linda Blair and she probably gets like understand like do you understand how fucked up this is? Do you understand how this isn't real? Do you have any questions? Can we I think you can do it. So I don't really have a problem with it, but I'm curious where you stand.
Yeah, I think it takes a really grounded kid. I think it takes a grounded family, but again, it's for arts and entertainment purposes. If no one's forcing them to do it, right? The weird thing is they're ultimately, like everything else we do in life, they're doing it for money, which is interesting to think about. But yeah, with Linda Blair in particular, I think it was interesting. I think Friedkin said her agency, now she was doing modeling and she was doing commercials. She was like a young kid in I believe in New York. But her agency didn't even send her headshot, like 30 or 40 other kids. And Friedkin, her mom brought her in for like a anonymous casting call. And that's how they discovered her. But I think even in her screen test, like she had to do the bit where she's just like spewing obscenities at the doctors or whatever. And, she was saying like she was embarrassed and everything like that. But I guess there's conditioning from the filmmakers and from the on-set people, the parents and everything saying like, it's just a part, it's make-believe, it's pretend, that sort of thing. It was interesting how they protected her though. They were able to kind of skirt around things a little bit because Mercedes McCambridge did the voice of Pazuzu. So possessed Reagan is being voiced by this older character actress. So they were able to dub in some of the stuff. So Reagan didn't have to at least say it, or Linda Blair didn't actually have to say some of the stuff.
Right.
And then the bit with the crucifix, it was really cool to see how they pulled that off. They basically had a box with fake blood in it on the bed, somewhere kind of obscured under the covers or by her nightgown, by Linda Blair's nightgown. And they told her to just stab the crucifix. I guess they kind of shot it rear 3/4, so you couldn't see her mouth moving. And then they shot it where she's just stabbing the crucifix into the box. They didn't tell her anything else. Just stab this crucifix into the box. And then Mercedes McCambridge did the VO. And then they cobbled the scene together with those disparate elements, which I thought was really clever.
Yeah, that is clever.
You can't have the girl. You can't. I mean, that would have been
No, I agree with you there.
Yeah.
That's why I think, again, it takes the proper crew coaching. You don't need to know the dialogue, for instance, at all.
Right. But the illusion, again, I think about this a lot with movies. I mean, I think of other things, Stanley Kubrick's Lolita, which is another thing. Stranger Things is a great example. Any kind of horror, any kind of thing with a rated R or higher thing where young kids are involved.
Game of Thrones.
Oh, of course. That's a perfect example.
Game of Thrones is ludicrous. In terms of, in my mind, I think way worse than any, like maybe the vagina scene, but not virtually anything else. Maybe in the these soldiers are threatening to rape Sansa when she's like 14 years old, dragging her down.
Oh, that whole scene.
Like an alleyway. They're telling Arya to be a boy so she doesn't get raped. I mean,
it is pretty extreme. Yeah. Bran climbing the tower and seeing Jaime and Cersei
together. So
action.
that's a good example of, you got to find mature children and they obviously did, but very different than Harry Potter or something like that.
Honest storytelling.
Dumbledore wasn't wasn't banging out McGonagall, whatever her name was.
Hey, death of Cedric Diggory, though. Come on. They did kill kids in Harry Potter.
They did. Yeah, that's true. That's true.
They did do that.
Dig, what else do you want to talk about? I mean, I've wrapped up my notes, but I'm wondering if there are any other topics you wanted to touch on before we go.
I just think it's interesting. Like, I'm wondering what film is going to approach The Exorcist for, there's great horror films. There's great horror films and little subgenres, parody, homicidal maniac, the solo killer. There's so many different genres of horror. There's psychological horror, which I'm a big fan of, that Colin is too. But I'm wondering, in 50 years, is anything, when are all the stops going to be pulled out with horror? I always wonder that with horror, because I'm sort of an arm's length fan of horror. You guys know that about me. I'm very squeamish, not good with horror. Things get in my head. Things get under my skin very easily. They stay with me. But I do love the genre because there's so much to do there. And you could really, what I love about it is you could really have a visceral and emotional effect on people with horror. You could really play into people's fears. It's fascinating genre. I always think I could direct a really scary live action horror film. Also waiting for a properly scary, a properly frightening animated horror film. Feature film? Why has that never been done? So much you could do with that. But I'm wondering when that one movie is going to come out. And there's elements of this with various directors and various projects over the years. I'm not saying horror, and various countries. It's not just American. I think of the French film High Tension. That was a scary fucking movie. But when everything's just, all the elements are going to be combined to that one movie that gets that creates the buzz that The Exorcist did. And can you do that today? Is it possible to create that sort of buzz, that level of hype today? Is it possible, or could you create even more hype with the advent of all the media we have at our fingertips? So that's one thing I always think about with horror is, when is that one person going to make that one? Again, Ari Aster with Hereditary, very hard movie to watch. That's a movie I've actually told people not to watch. I think it's like, I want to see her. I'm like, don't watch it. As a mom, don't. You can't. Like, it's too upsetting. Like, I know my wife, like, you're not going to like it. It's not going to appeal to you, And Helene's very good with, she could watch Michael Myers and Freddy Krueger and Jason all day, but I just know that movie won't work for her. So
Aster movies are scarier than those movies. That's the beauty.
I think so.
Definitely. Yeah. I mean, definitely. Unless you're a blood, like, blood and gore is just so boring, dude. First of all, if you really do like that kind of shit, like PJ level violent shit, capital V, capital S violent shit level stuff, just go on fucking Live Leak. You can watch the real thing. Okay. In the meantime, like, this is all fake. That to me, at some point you realize when you're watching a slasher, it's like, this only goes so far for me at this point. It's fun. It's great. But when I'm watching, I remember what you did last. What is it? I remember what you did last time. What's that movie called?
Oh, I know what you did last time.
I remember what you did last. It's like the most old.
Kyle, this is too many syllables. Can we think?
I know we got or like movies like that. It's like, that's not particularly scary. It's just fun. And I've not been particularly scared by that kind of shit since I was probably 10. or 12. I'm not judging anyone for being scared about that stuff. It's just the unknown nature of this sort of thing or similar works that make them truly scary. That's why Midsummer and Hereditary are scary. That's why The Witch is scary. Mike is finally coming around to watching horror after not liking it. I think she's kind of realizing she does like it as I watch some things around her, and I really got to get her to watch a couple of these things. But I think there are a few movies that I think would scare the living shit out of her, and so I try to we'll ease her into those because that's part of the fun.
Did she watch The Exorcist?
She watched it. Yeah, she liked it. Yeah, I think
she liked it.
Yeah.
Oh, she saw it. Did she watch The Shining too?
Yeah, she really liked it. And she said she didn't find The Shining scary. And see, that's what I was making that argument too. Where yeah, it's not a horror movie in the traditional sense. It is an ethereal mind fuck of a movie.
Yes.
It's not like you're scared witless. It's a compelling thriller of a movie. Really,
I agree.
Yeah. So
yeah, for sure.
Well, this has been fun. We'll continue to do. I think we'll do a couple more of these classic style horror movies in sequence here. But it was fun to go back and watch The Exorcist, and I really do want to go read it. It's a perfect time of year for it too. The leaves falling off the trees, a little overcast. It's actually nice today. It's 80 degrees here today, which is weird, but we were getting down.
It's that warm?
Yeah, but we were getting down into the 40s, and it's that time. So
it is.
So maybe it's time for a couple more horror knockbacks coming soon. And Dave, before we go, let's wrap it up as we always do with the dad joke.
Yeah, I love knockback Halloween in October. Then we got at least 2 more left. We got 3 more left, I think.
Yeah, maybe. Cocktober.
All right. Our friend Brian Henninger. I absolutely couldn't resist this one. Kyle, today I asked my sensei if he could teach me to use throwing stars. He said, "Sure I can." Sure I can. Sure I can.
Yeah, that's good. I like that. Do you know that Dash, our nephew, takes karate and he's like a yellow belt now or whatever? But
no, I didn't even realize he was in karate.
Yeah, Derek does like an impersonation of his like karate master where he's like, "Yes, sir. Yes, sir." Like, that's like, and they all say it back to him like, "Yes, sir. Yes, sir." It's so cute. He's a good kid.
So the teacher says yes, sir, and then they say it back?
I think so. Like who's he saying? Like, yes, sir? Yes,
right.
Right. It's something I think I'll have to ask Derek to make sure. Yeah, he does like
the perfect call and response.
Yeah, it's perfect. This guy apparently is like a legendary karate teacher. I love it.
That's brilliant. All right, I'm going to have some pea soup.
Yeah, enjoy. I got to go. I'm actually going to record another show after this. So, back to back. But
God bless you.
But knockback's more important, so we did it first. Yeah, thanks.
Some holy water.
Actually, I have to do it backwards because so it comes out.
Oh, you got to do
it. There we go. Yeah. There you go. I like the it's like Catholic things, like Catholic priests or Catholic funny things, like the priests that do it really like the whole thing, and then the guys that are just like it's kind of like Jerry Seinfeld's old bit about the Nazi salute, where he's like, some of these guys were doing this, but then some of the guys were just like, why were they just like allowed to just do that? And you know what he's talking, exactly what he's talking about. You'd see like some of these guys, they would do like the full on Nazi salute, and then some of the guys would just be like.
You even see that in movies. That's a great point.
And so you could do a similar thing with the cross, where there's like some priests that are just like.
Yeah, I thought it could be a little more emphatic in the movie. Father Merrin wasn't always bringing it with the sign of the cross. By the way, was Pazuzu doing the Nazi salute? The Pazuzu statue?
I don't think so.
Or was he waving?
I don't know if he was doing anything. He was just hanging out.
Kind of like a non-threatening, almost cute statue. I'm sorry to offend you, Pazuzu. The snake penis, a little much. But the rest horrifying. Of Pazuzu, kind of cute.
It reminds me of Ninja Gaiden, like the statues in Ninja Gaiden, and how much those things scare me too. It's like, no. We can't have any of these mystical idols from the third world and in the United States. I don't want any of this stuff here, please.
By the way, one more thing.
Yeah, please.
Max von Sydow. How is he younger in Force Awakens than he was in this movie? What the fuck? That's insane.
Let me see if there's a comparison picture.
I mean, that was what? 2017 and this was 1973.
So, you're asking me to do math.
Yeah.
That's not going to work out well.
That's a lot of years. 40 years.
46, 44. I don't know.
Something like that. You're close.
Forget it.
45 say.
Dig, let's get the hell out of here. It's time
All
to go.
right, my friend.
Thank you all out there for your love, kindness, and support of all things KnockBack and Last Stand. Remember, you can buy merch, laststandmedia.store, and support us on Patreon, patreon.com/laststandmedia. We appreciate you. If you listen on free feeds, leave us a nice review on iTunes and elsewhere. Follow us on YouTube if you like the video version. You like to watch, you little perverts. And we'll see you next time. Until then, goodbye. KnockBack, a retro and nostalgia podcast, is a product and trademark of Last Stand Media and Collins Last Stand LLC, and is recorded from Central Virginia and the Philadelphia suburbs, USA. The show was conceived by and is produced by me, Colin Moriarty. My co-host is Dagan Moriarty. KnockBack's executive producer is Dustin Furman, and the show is edited by associate producer Ben Smith. As you know, all of Last Stand Media's shows, including KnockBack, are fan-funded on Patreon at patreon.com/laststandmedia. The following names are at the producer support level or higher on Patreon, and we're grateful for your kindness and generosity.